hope is a great thing, and Catholicism is a virtue. We love hope. We need hope. I'm not dismissing hope. I want to be clear about that. However, for ambiguous grievers, I discovered, through my interviews and through my analysis of surveys, that hope for an ambiguous griever, when it is misdirected, it can be as dangerous as it is good, because it puts our attention on something we can't control, and that's the loved one we're grieving.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it is my pleasure to have Stephanie Sarazin with us. Stephanie is a writer, researcher, and experiential expert in ambiguous grief. Her work began with her own experience of midlife trauma, which sparked an ambitious journey, spiritually and around the world, to understand, name, and heal the grief she found within her. Her efforts revealed a first-of-its-kind definition for ambiguous grief, whereby grief is onset by the loss of a loved one who is still living, and wherein the experience of hope presents as a stage of the grieving process. Stephanie's work brings new resources to reframe disruptive, activating events as a gateway to discovering your highest self, in turn championing ambiguous grief as nuanced, natural, and navigable. Stephanie, it's so great to have you on the show.
Hi, Stephan. I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I have your book here, Soul Broken. I got it shortly after it came out, so hopefully that helped your Amazon sales rankings. Soul Broken, a guidebook for your journey through ambiguous grief. What was the impetus for you to write this book? And I know that you went through quite a process yourself, which gave you lots of lessons and eventual healing and so forth. But then there was the decision to write the book and share that with the world. Are those both inspired by the exact same event, or was there some sort of additional epiphany or something that happened?
Absolutely rooted in the same event, and really a knowing that emerged almost immediately, a reluctant knowing, those kind of annoying things sometimes that emerge deep within us and we know is true and we know is what we are, to do, what we should do, but maybe don't want to do. So that was my experience. I found myself in deep grief and really confused, isolated, and mix of emotions after the end of my marriage, a marriage I loved and did not foresee ending. But nonetheless, after 20 years, it did. And in this period of deep grief that followed, I recognized that my grief was different. I couldn't quite pinpoint how or why it was different, but I followed my intuition. I followed my deep desire to feel better and try to intellectualize my way out of it. If I could just figure out what was different about this grief, well, then I could heal and move forward. And that was really naive of me to think that I could intellectualize myself out of grief, but it really was the first step in my own understanding. And so from that understanding, I found that indeed there are many people, in fact, over conservatively estimated here, over 70% of the population will experience ambiguous grief at least once in our lifetime. But few of us know there's a name for it, much less how to integrate it and live with it and heal that anguish. And so the book came as a knowing. Once I kind of unlocked why it was different, it was kind of in tandem with the book, that this was something I wish I would have known right away and wanted to offer to others.
If you feeling depressed or upset or sad, you're not sure whether this is ambiguous grief or not, what are the hallmarks that would make it obvious to someone who hasn't read your book?
Yeah, well, the short answer to that is hope. And this was a finicky, slippery experience that kept popping up, and I couldn't quite name it. I became a reluctant grief researcher through this experience because I could see that there was something in other people who were going through the same experience I was, grieving the loss of a loved one who was still living. And whether they were grieving their loved one due to Alzheimer's or dementia or traumatic brain injury, or, a child to addiction, a partner to incarceration, or gender identity, familial or friendship estrangement, no matter what the cause, I could see that there was something that just kind of kept popping up along with, the hallmark grief experiences that we know from, probably most notably from the Kubler-Ross model years and years ago, but anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Somebody who's dealing with ambiguous grief, well, I'm just having a hard time because, I'm going through a divorce, or because I'm estranged from my loved one, or whatever the case, you know that it's ambiguous grief when you are able to identify hope also presenting as part of the experience. And hope is a great thing. And Catholicism is a virtue. We love hope. We need hope. I'm not dismissing hope. I want to be clear about that. However, for ambiguous grievers, I discovered, through my interviews and through my analysis of surveys, that hope for an ambiguous griever, when it is misdirected, it can be as dangerous as it is good, because it puts our attention on something we can't control, and that's the loved one we're grieving.
Right. So we can't get to a place of closure because, the old adage, when one door closes, another door opens, but you got your foot in the door that's trying to close so that you can open the new one and enter a new chapter in your life. And you're holding on to something that is not likely to turn into, let's say it's a divorce that turns into a remarriage with that same partner. And so you push off into the distance your true soulmate who is meant for you because you can't close that door yet. And so you're prolonging the agony and, not stepping strongly into your future.
Absolutely. Well said. And you say that from a place of, it feels like experience to me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I believe that 70% number that you gave is probably underrepresenting. So I went through a divorce that was quite painful in 2008, 2009, and I went 2.5 years without a single date after that, and I was a mess. Thankfully, 3 different people told me to go to a Tony Robbins event that I wasn't aware of or anything. I didn't really know anything about him, but seemingly not coincidental that 3 different people within a week of each other would tell me, like, wow, you're in bad shape, Stephan. You need to go to this Tony Robbins event that's in Chicago. It's just a few hours drive away. Go to this thing. And I went, and thankfully it started me on a journey of rediscovering myself, rebooting my life. I had no idea I was going to walk on 2,000-degree hot coals in my bare feet on the first night. I was scared out of my wits, but then it was the metaphor for my rebirth. Like, wow, if I can do that without getting burned, without even a blister, I can certainly go get LASIK. I can get a hair transplant. I can change my diet. I can do all these different things. And so that ambiguous grieving process that I went through, where I wasn't able to really process well the situation and the loss of that marriage, that I didn't ask for a divorce. It was my wife at the time. But what a gift. What an incredible gift. Look back at that thinking, if that version of me saw what I was going to become and who I was going to marry and what kind of life we'd have and the child we'd have together and everything, like, I just like, that's crazy. I would not be sad at all. And yeah, we can't really see into the future, most of us at least. Some of us are psychic, I guess, but it's like you're grieving something that is an illusion, because that marriage was not good. It was full of dysfunction, and I wasn't looking at it.
No, gosh, thanks for sharing that, truly. And, kudos to you for recognizing the divine timing of 3, not just 1 or 2, 3 individuals coming to you in the same span of time and saying, this is something you should look at. You ought to consider this. Once upon a time, I would have said, oh, that's crazy, or that's how wacky. Isn't that weird? I really try not to use that language anymore, because through my experience of grief, I've been broken open in a way that is more aligned to my greatest and highest self. And I'm living in a space now where I just have a different view of the world than I did prior. And what is so wonderful about it is that I thought I had a wonderful life. By all accounts, I did. All the boxes were checked and things were going great. So I thought, but, meanwhile, I didn't know that, speaking of illusion, I was living in an illusion and not fully aware of the goings on in my own marriage. And in discovering that, was faced with a daunting choice that I didn't know how to process, much less kind of what to do next. And, when you talked about going into that just kind of feeling of despair when your marriage ended, it makes sense, right? Because our egos are so attached to our comfort, into the lives we've created, and moving into the unknown and moving into, gosh, something that we don't want, especially, right, is just so difficult. And yet, if we allow it, I have learned that grief, really grief of any kind, can be a portal to our greatest and highest self if we let it. And so often we don't let it because it hurts. It's so painful. We find ourselves in situations that, like walking on, fire, that we wouldn't have before. What divine timing for you, and what a deep bow for you to do that hard work and find yourself where you have now. It sounds like it was fully worth it.
As you said, it's divine timing. And for somebody who doesn't like, that sounds like just a platitude, potentially for some of our listeners. The way I see it is that our lives are fully scripted out by ourselves, in collaboration with God and our guides. And what happens then is that we live that out as if we are the star of a movie, like we're Truman in the Truman Show, and we forget that we did this. And so we're acting it out as if we have no clue.
I use a very similar analogy, and I say, it's like I'm the main character of my own video game. We are all the main characters of our own video games. And the goal is to level up and jump over these obstacles and face these obstacles, not cower in a corner, right? Or, take the ladder down and hide. And in my mind, I'm a Gen Xer. So for me, the image of the old Atari game Pitfall comes up, or Donkey Kong, right? Barrels are being thrown at us, and, we've got to jump over those. We've got to grab a rope and swing across quicksand. And there are a lot of metaphors in that associated with grief, because if we're staying in our grief too long, if we are focused too much on what I call external hope, right? Hope in ambiguous grief is a double agent. She works both sides. And when we're too focused on external hope and how we can change our loved one, well, gosh, if I could just, maybe if I lose 10 pounds, my wife will see me differently. And, I'm going to change for her. Or maybe if there's new research coming soon, and I donate to Alzheimer's and start researching breakthroughs, there will be a cure for my parent soon. And we're putting our hope in those other places. And it feels good because we feel like we're being proactive, right? And really, though, we're placing our hope elsewhere instead of turning that hope into ourselves and saying, well, maybe if I started exercising, I would feel better about myself, right? It's not doing it for another person. It's not waiting for another person to change. And as I was writing the book and interviewing people, I came across a quote from Epictetus, who says that when our hope is placed on things out of our control, when we are trying to control things that are not ours to control, we spiral. I'm obviously that's not verbatim, but he says, when we're doing this, we cannot grow ourselves, right? And so see that which is in our control and harness that. And that's something I encourage anybody in grief, or just looking to level up, right, in this game of life, to take a look at what is in their control. And if we can look at life through that lens, to your point, divine timing might be a term that sounds kind of hokey to some, and I understand that. To others who have had so many synchronicities happen, they're probably looking at life through this lens, or they're about to, and they can say, aha, oh, I see, that was happening for me. And what do we want to do with it, right?
Happening for you and by you, because your higher self wrote that script to the movie.
Well, and if we really want to take it a step further, we're co-creating, right? We're co-creating with the universe, I believe. And, we're engaging in, some call it sacred contracts. Here in the United States, we don't do grief very well at all. We all know we're going to die, right? Like that's no surprise to your listeners. We're all going to die. We're not immortal. And yet, even though we know we're likely going to be grieving people we love, we don't do it so well, right? It's not something most people are comfortable with. What I learned though, in trying to find my way out of my own pain, I wasn't on, a noble quest to help others at this point. I was really just trying to figure out how to feel like I wasn't crawling out of my skin, how to feel like I could trust the world again, how to get out of bed. I started looking at what other cultures do and how other cultures grieve. And that led me to Costa Rica, where I sat with shamans for a week in plant medicine ceremony. In that experience, I came to understand the concepts of co-creation in a way that I never could have had I not lived this new life, had I not needed to find the answers.
What a gift, huh?
Such a gift. Now, if you would have told me 6-7 years ago, oh, this grief is a gift, and grieving the loss of somebody who's still very well alive is such a gift, it would have not been a nice response. I would have not had any time for such foolishness. I'm in pain. I just need to feel better. And what do? It is a gift. And so as I was writing the book and interviewing people for the book, I'm always kind of struck with trying to find a balance, Stephan, right? Like that balance between like honoring somebody else's grief and where they are in their grief experience, and also like not having my pom-poms up too high to say, I'm so excited you've got the opportunity to level up. This is an opportunity. What are you going to do with it? And like, this is the Donkey Kong barrel coming your way.
Or the magic mushroom that's going to make you a Super Mario.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yes, right. Literally magic mushrooms. What are you going to do to feel better in a way that isn't numbing, right? In a way that is healing. Certainly plant medicine, ayahuasca is not for everybody. For me, that was an opportunity to get into my subconscious and kind of peek through the veil for multiple nights in a row and purge and understand in a way that you can't quite explain.
So what was the epiphany about co-creation that you got from the plant medicine?
Some people call it a vision. I call it my experience. It wasn't something, I was observing it while also in dialogue with the universe, I think is probably the best way to say it. Through these experiences, which when I think about them, almost look like a home movie, like an old timey, movie you might pop in and watch. It is that we are all here to level up. We are all connected. We are all a part of this ecosystem of Earth. And Gary Zukav, who is a tremendous teacher of mine, calls it the Earth School. And if we can look at this life experience as a place where we are to learn, we're not here to make the most money, accumulate the most toys, consume the most food. We're here to remember who we are, achieve the lessons we came here to learn. And in my ayahuasca experience, I saw what my lessons were. And I left that experience, which was 5 years ago now, understanding what was next for me and why. And one of those things was writing this book. And I write about this, I think, in chapter 6. The name of the book, the title of the book, Soul Broken, came from night one, my ayahuasca ceremony, where I had, ayahuasca is all about purging that which is no longer necessary for us, emotionally, physically, all of it. And so we have buckets where you're vomiting. Some people don't vomit. Some people vomit all night long. And I was in the camp of the latter.
I would have guessed that.
No fun. The very end, I felt just such a warm embrace and heard so distinctly in my ear, you are not heartbroken. You are soul broken. Come back tomorrow. I understood then that soul broken is this feeling of anguish that is onset by the loss of an important relationship, and a relationship in which we feel inextricably linked, one that we see as identifying for us. Ambiguous grievers grieve without validation, without witnesses. And that's so grief needs witnesses, right? And when our grief is witnessed, our love and our loss feels validated. But ambiguous grievers, we don't have the societal norms that, say, widows have. I felt like a widow. Perhaps you felt like a widower, but who was bringing you casseroles, right? And saying, oh my gosh, he's lost his wife. Let's circle around him and love him, and people within divorce, we don't have the opportunity to eulogize our loved one, as though we would have had they died, right? Or to receive condolences from others in a way that says, gosh, I see your loss. I see your pain. I know that comes from love and I'm here for you, right? It's, you're better off anyway, or what a jerk, or just, who knows? And it's not because people are bad. It's because we don't know what to say to people who are grieving, much less, especially if we can't even understand that their grief is grief.
Mm. Or even worse is, I could have told you this ages ago, but I didn't. I just saw the writing on the wall the moment you proposed to her and whatever. It's like
Not helpful.
that's not helpful at all. No.
And that's not something we would say had you lost your loved one in a tragic accident. Nobody would say, I saw this coming. That behavior, I saw this coming. So, but yet we can say it. We say all these different things because we don't recognize that people are grieving. And so, again, other cultures do ceremony and ritual so much better than we do. And that's something I encourage people to explore. If you're grieving a loss of a loved one and you've not been witnessed in your grief hasn't been validated because there's no funeral, there's no eulogy to give, there's no scholarship fund to start, there's no headstone or, obituary to write. Create something that's meaningful. And I'm working now on helping others develop what I did, which I call a faux funeral. Why not adopt the same constructs and honor your loss, honor your marriage or your estrangement or your parent or whomever you've lost. Honor that you loved that part of your life and you loved that relationship. You can still honor it and practice letting it go while you grieve. It's not either or. And you're the boss of it, however you choose to ritualize your ambiguous grief and the relationship you've lost is totally up to you. But having a witness is really important. So I always encourage people to invite at least one person to bear witness.
Do you think that grieving gets in the way of learning the lessons from Earth School of the situation, the trauma, the challenge that the person's going through?
It can. Absolutely. What a smart question. Thank you for that. It can if we choose that, because it is a choice. And, I think a misnomer about grief is that we heal and we move on and we don't think about it again. It's that we get to the end of it and we can dust off and say, well, that was awful, and we're done with it forever. But the truth is, it can be a decade later. It can be 2 decades later. Time can pass and you can find yourself thinking about that relationship and reflecting on what that felt like. And even when you're in a great place and you're grateful and you wouldn't trade your new life for anything, you can still feel grief for that love that was lost. And that's because that love is still there. And you would expect it to be, because especially in divorce situations, we were married to these people. We loved them. And even though it's ended and we love new souls, there's still a part of us that can hold love for that person. That is a part of who we once were, right? And so grief can continue, but the intensity at which continues really is up to us. And we can dial into that vibration if we choose and wallow. There's actually a term, the DSM recently changed the name to prolonged grief disorder.
That sounds so dysfunctional.
Right. It used to be called complicated grief, and now it's prolonged grief disorder. And what I found in my research is that individuals who stay ambiguous grievers, who are grieving the loss of somebody still alive, who are focused more on external hope for a number of years, they are more likely to kind of slide into that complicated grief. Because if you think about it as like a roundabout, and you're going around and around on this roundabout of hope, and once in a while you'll have hope for yourself, But if you're mostly projecting hope externally, you're just going to stay on that roundabout until there's nowhere else for you to go than into complicated grief, prolonged grief disorder. Columbia University has a department focused on this in helping individuals out of prolonged grief disorder. You can only extract yourself with a professional. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh shoot, I am not able to move forward. I am feeling depressed. It has been years and I am still thinking about that loss. Whether it is a loss by physical death or loss by an ambiguous grief loss where they're still alive, if you're now defining yourself and if your life is somehow defined by that loss, you might want to talk to somebody about whether or not you're experiencing prolonged grief disorder and work with a clinician to help extract you from that quicksand because you can't get out by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Would you actually think that medication would be in order potentially?
It was for me, but after a fight, and I write about this in the book as well, it's a personal decision, whether it's plant medicine or pharmaceutical medicine, that's up to you. When my therapist first recommended antidepressants to me, I was offended. I said, you don't know me. How could you? And this just shows you how detached I was from reality or thinking. And it makes sense. I discovered my marriage wasn't what I thought I was. I was experiencing trauma. So my brain wasn't functioning in that normal space and that processing space. So when she said this to me, that suggesting antidepressants, I said, you don't know me. I've run marathons. Now, what that has to do with anything, I don't know, but I was pretty firm with her. And the second time she recommended it, I actually left early at one point because it was just ridiculous. Now, after not sleeping for 2 weeks, my hair is falling out. I said, talk to me. Yeah, okay, talk to me. And I had a dear friend say to me, if not now, when? Why are you so afraid of medication? And the reality was I was ignorant to it. I'd never been on antidepressants. I didn't understand how they would help. And had I taken that life preserver of antidepressants sooner, it would have helped me. So I encourage anybody, if it's something that's being suggested to you, maybe don't dismiss it. It's not something you need forever, which is false understanding that I had. I thought, well, if I start this, I'll never be able to stop. And I don't know how it's going to change my brain chemistry. And I need every neuron here to figure out what I'm doing next. That was 7 years ago. And, I'm back to my base, and it's not something I need right now, but I'll be much quicker to accept it should I need it in the future.
Now, would you consider something like postpartum depression to be ambiguous grief or not, and why?
Gosh, great question. I've never been asked that. You're going to hear me think this through in real time. So postpartum depression is not the loss of a loved one or an identity, right? But it is a very real experience. I can tell you as a mother of 3. Postpartum depression is a very real experience. Now, on some level, it may present in the same way.
But isn't it a loss of an identity of the person who was free to just go and watch a movie in the theater whenever she wanted, or to go take a long bath and not have to worry about, children and what was going on in the house, and just like have that mental space and so forth? Isn't that part of who they were and that they're no longer?
Yes, that part is true. However, my understanding of postpartum depression is that, and I'm going back 20 years now to remember my own, it is chemical, right? This is a chemical imbalance in your brain, in your body. It's psychological, it's physiological, and onset post-pregnancy, right? And so getting those hormones regulated may be the part of the root cause of why you're feeling all of these experiences. And we may have some wistfulness for what was, but with ambiguous grief, again, hope presents. And I don't think that that's there with postpartum.
Yeah. So one thing about postpartum, I understand what you're saying about there's a physiological situation with hormone imbalances and so forth. And there is a spiritual root cause to every ailment, every disorder, disease, chronic pain, etc. What do you think the spiritual root cause is with postpartum, or maybe just with your postpartum you had 20 years ago? And then what would be the spiritual root cause of your marriage breaking apart?
Well, I think the answer is the same for both and different for everyone, which would be whatever your sacred contract is. And I learned this term, sacred contracts, from Carolyn Meese, who wrote a book about it. And, I read this book 6 years ago and felt a real kinship with it. I just felt like, okay, that makes sense. And, the idea around sacred contracts is that our souls, part of ourselves that is always, is infinite, is in relationship with other souls, soul families, prior to our incarnation here in the earth school. And so when we are not in our physical form, when we are in our soul form, not in this body, we're talking with others, we're in relationship with others, and we're helping one another with the goal of leveling up, right? So I can only speak to my own experience, of which I better understood through Carolyn's book, Sacred Contracts, and through my ayahuasca experience. And that is that, okay, this was part of the sacred contract. Now, if we're kind of holding that up next to what is the spiritual cause, like what's the lack or what's happening spiritually, I would say it's resistance. It's resistance to that sacred contract. It's forgetting about the sacred contract and working against it.
So it's like this agreement in the non-physical, the other side of the veil. Before you incarnate, you decide together that, all right, we're going to be soulmates for a period of time, or we're going to be partners for a period of time, but it's not going to last. And you're going to get all these wonderful lessons. I'm going to be the quote unquote villain in your movie. And you're going to probably forget that we made this agreement. And it's for everyone's highest and best good, especially yours. And I'm willing to do this for you because I love you so much. And it's going to lead to you being a real basket case for X number of months or years. But then you're going to move on and you're going to have this wonderful lesson. So that is the concept of sacred contracts, correct? So what happens when everyone forgets their sacred contracts? Then everybody's lost, right? Trying to walk around in a dark room, bumping into everything. And then how do you find that light? How do you reveal to yourself and to perhaps the other people in your life that are the supporting actors in that movie?
Yeah, I think that in my experience, those supporting actors may not be speaking the same language, right? And of course, this in when we're bumping around, we don't have this language ourselves, right? It's like the beginning of being born, right? It's the beginning of if you can think about it as like the next part of your life. You're bumping around. You don't have the language you need. You don't know who your caretakers are. You don't know, the people that you've depended on and by whom you've identified yourself with are no longer present as they once were. So who is, and how do I even trust this world? Who am I in this world without this identity or without this person? And, I think it sounds so basic, Stephan, but the very first thing we can do is breathe. The very first thing we can do that helps ourselves is to tune into our breath. So if you are feeling like you are bumping around, and maybe you don't even have a loss to kind of point to, but if you just feel kind of, like a plastic bag in the wind, if you just feel rudderless and alone, or you just don't feel direction, just get in tune with your breath. I've been doing breath work for 7 years. It was my first step, was to just get quiet and breathe and tune into myself. And breath by breath, we will come back to ourselves, and not the selves we once were, right? You're not the Stephan you were in your marriage how many ever years ago, nor am I. We come back to ourselves as coming back to our soul. And we're continuing on that path of higher consciousness and continuing to understand, and the pieces just seem to fit. If we can trust that unfolding, which has been such a delightful surprise of this experience for me, is that I'm no longer rigid in my planning or, it's done this way and we're going to do it this, this, and this. I'm a high achieving firstborn, typical. But instead, I'm like, oh, well, let's see how this goes. Let's see where this unfolds. Once in a while, I'll be like, I am so freaking tired of practicing my patience. And yet I know that what is happening is for my greatest and highest good. And this is an opportunity for me to practice my patience and level up, right? So we don't always have to like it.
This is the difference between external hope and that faith and trust in God, that everything is always working out for us, that this is for my highest and best good. I don't see it right now because I have this myopic viewpoint, but I can pray for more faith and trust and get a wider view, increase the aperture on my lens so that I can make sense of this. And you don't have to make sense of it if you have enough faith and trust already. But if you get that gift from above of the wider viewpoint, like, I see why that happened. And it is perfect. You can't connect the dots except looking backwards. So if you're looking at all those dots and it finally falls into place and it makes sense, it is such a gift. And for me, it fills me with gratitude. I practice something called gratitude, or I call it challenge gratitudes, but it's something I learned from my sister-in-law. She learned from Rabbi Shalom Arush, who wrote a book called The Garden of Emunah. And it's this, that you write down your challenges and you thank God for them, because you trust, you believe, and you have faith that these are for my highest and best good. And that means that this is actually an incredible gift. And reflecting on that while you're gratitude journaling, it leads to some real epiphanies, especially if you have the intention of seeing that wider viewpoint too, so that you get the glimpse of the bigger picture. You're not going to see the bigger picture altogether, but you'll get these glimpses, because that's the nature of the game. You don't want to, the video game or the movie is, you don't want to know all of the cheat codes ahead of time. You don't want to know the plot line of the movie by reading the Wikipedia page before you go to the theater. Why would you want that in your life? You want a surprise, seeming spontaneity of it.
Right, which is real. I mean, I agree with you. I've, been in conversation and relationship with plenty of people who would be terrified by that notion, right? Because that sounds very scary and dangerous, right? And we can get into why that is their narrative and their inner dialogue. But I think the root of that is a lack of trusting the unfolding. And so why make ourselves anxious and afraid? Instead, let's trust the unfolding and go see what the movie's about, right?
Yeah, that roundabout that you talked about of going around and around, that reminded me, by the way, of, I learned from Dr. Daniel Amen, who was a guest on this podcast a while back, about the diamond pattern in our brains, that not in everybody, but when you have a certain level of activity in these kind of 4 areas of the brain, it forms this diamond looking pattern. And essentially you're looping, you're ruminating over and over and over again the same thing. Let's say, like, maybe I could have done something different. Maybe it could still work out. Maybe. And then round and round we go.
Yep, external hope. And I'm going to have to look into that diamond pattern. I follow his work. And, you mentioned a prayer earlier. One of my favorite prayers in this time, and really anyway, is show me. Just simple, show me. Right. And when I'm feeling like, well, this doesn't make any sense, or this is a plot twist, didn't see this coming in my video game, in my movie. Okay, show me. And what I recommend people do, and this is actually the first tool I offer in the book, is setting your intention. When you've gathered your breath and you're able to look at your experience and understand that this is happening, and you're not living in denial, setting an intention is a really good way to tether. And intentions change and shift. You're not picking one intention for the rest of your life, but it's an intention. I set an intention before, we came into conversation to clear my mind and be fully and actively present in our dialogue. That is my intention, to be my authentic self. And, when I go about the rest of my day, I might set different intentions, or there's long-term intentions. How do I want to intentionally parent? How do I want to be in relationship with my partner, with intentionality? And we can control our intention, right? And that's kind of something Epictetus would say, like, yeah, good job. You can control that. So do that, right? We can control our intention, but we don't know what's coming. So show me, and trust that the people who need us will be presented in our lives, and the people we need will be presented to us in our lives. Just sometimes have to be patient.
Yeah, that's not that dissimilar to another statement that I learned, or question really. I learned this from my Kabbalah teacher and coach. His question that I use all the time now is, why is this in my movie?
Right. That's terrific. And the answer will reveal itself if we're open, I believe.
The way I get it is because I've developed, or I have been gifted a clairaudience, I'll receive it mostly as words coming in my inner voice. And so they'll answer me.
Outstanding. I had that experience in writing the book where I would sit not knowing where to go from here, from a certain point. Again, when we're open to receiving, we are antennas. And I think we can, if we're able to kind of get in a space of removing those blocks and removing those beliefs and kind of adopting a different lens in which to see the world, then everything takes a new shape, right? And things start finding their way like puzzle pieces to us.
So many movies that we can point to that give us lessons about our movie, and like one of them that was recently gifted to me or shown to me was Pleasantville. I saw that decades ago, and then I was given the nudge to watch it again. And so my wife, Orion, and I watched it, and it was profound. I had no idea. Did you see that movie?
So long ago. I do remember it though, right?
It started in black and white, and eventually it kind of morphed into color. Well, this is a metaphor for what we're going through now, this ascension process from 3D to 5D. And of course, I did not get that when I first saw the movie in the 90s, but I totally got it this time. I'm like, now I see why you guys had me watch this.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. I'll be tuning in as well. And I write about The Wizard of Oz doing the same thing, where again, black and white to Technicolor. And we all have the opportunity to be living in Technicolor.
Yep. So it's just another way of explaining your metaphor of up-leveling.
That's right. We have to walk the path. Nobody can do it for us. And we all need to find our own version of our ruby slippers. What talisman can we hold on to that help us stay grounded, and what intention can we set, and being open to friends of all forms coming to us with lessons of whatever we might need, right?
But with Pleasantville, the thing that you don't get from the Wizard of Oz metaphor, but you get in Pleasantville, is that some people by choice will stay behind. They will fight tooth and nail to stay black and white. And you cannot save them, and nor are you supposed to. That robs them of their free will.
Absolutely. And this, I think, is what spins people, keeps them on the external hope, right? Thinking, I can help them. And you're throwing lifeline after lifeline. Especially this is relevant if you're involved with a loved one abusing substances, right? And you're throwing lifeline after lifeline saying, well, maybe this lifeline is what will help them. Maybe they're not actively choosing not to move into recovery and begin to evolve. Maybe that's a subconscious decision. Maybe it is the grasp of addiction, right? I can absolutely see why some forms of behavior are so deeply rooted in trauma that people would choose to stay behind, because facing their trauma and doing the work is more painful. So they'd rather be left behind than do the work, in the experience I've had in watching those who do stay behind. It might not be a conscious choice for others.
But we also need to respect that they have their path and they chose their movie. And trying to, we got to meet people where they're at. And if where they're at is, I want to spiral, maybe subconsciously or unconsciously, they want to spiral, even though they say that they don't. Consciously trying to keep throwing these lifelines at them, or give them some sort of spiritual pep talk that they're not ready for, you give them a memento mori coin, or you tell them all loss is an illusion, that doesn't help them. That actually further disconnects you from them and disconnects them from their experience.
Right. And you're not their director. You're not producing their movie. You're not directing their movie. We're bit players in other people's movies, right? I think the more we can acknowledge that, and I love, you're talking about looking at film as a reflection, and the fact that Pleasantville came out so long ago and now you can see it through this different lens, right? That makes me really curious about the people who wrote it. And that's how I felt when I just watched The Banshees of Inisherin. And if you've not watched it, I highly recommend it. That is something that kept calling to me. And finally I said, okay, let's go ahead and watch this. Doesn't seem like it would be anything I'm interested in. But what did I know? Again, it's like my own ignorance. And Stephan, it is the first film that I can point to that says this is ambiguous grief. This is exactly what ambiguous grief is. We see all the stages. It's about an estrangement. It's a friendship estrangement of two men 100 years ago who off the coast of Ireland. Well, what on earth do I have interest in watching that? That sounds awful. But this movie is getting such rave reviews. And I believe it's not because of the cinematography or the incredible acting or the costume design, all of which are award worthy. Oh my word. But it's because we can recognize on some level ourselves in them, in these relationships, either as the one who chose the estrangement or the one who chose to end the relationship or the one who didn't want that. And all of the cycles, even hope, we see in Colin Farrell's character, just clinging to hope and clinging to hope. And he's on a roundabout and just all of the consequences that come from spending too much time in ambiguous grief. And the film depicts it beautifully without ever mentioning that that's what it is. Because again, we don't have words for it until now.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'll have to check that out. All right. Well, we're at time here. So if our listener or viewer wants to pick up your book, which I hope they will, it's Soul Broken, a guidebook for your journey through ambiguous grief. And if they wanted to perhaps work with you, do you offer coaching, or how do they learn more beyond the book?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. You can find me on my website, which is my name, StephanieSarazin.com. And I do grief education work. So working one-on-one or very small group with individuals to understand their grief, recognize their grief, honor their grief, help people move through their grief, understanding that it becomes part of us and it's not something to recover from or get away from, but instead embrace and use it to regenerate. And then, of course, the book Soul Broken, which on the cover, it has 2 words. That's just because of the size of the text. It's 1 word, like on the spine. So if you're having trouble finding it, it's likely you're searching under 2 words, but 1 word, Soul Broken, as you would write heartbroken as 1 word. And you'll appreciate this, Stephan. There is a path on the cover, right? If you look closely, which I asked the illustrators to add, which really just pays homage to the idea of our own path work, our own individual path and toward healing. So you can find me on social media as well, on Instagram, LinkedIn, and other formats.
Okay. And we'll include all those links in the show notes for the episode. Thank you so much, Stephanie. You're a light in the world, and what an important book that you've written and what important work you're doing in the world. Thank you. Best of luck in your unfolding journey.
I appreciate it. And the light in me sees the light in you, Stephan. So thank you for having me, and thank you for the important work you're doing to bring these conversations to others. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you, listener. Now, you are a light in the world too, so make it a great day. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.